Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I thought I would film a video for you. It's a little bit different, so it's not like a usual haul or anything like that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the fantasy books that I read when I was a kid that got me really into fantasy. So I have a few series mostly to show you, but the first two books, what did I put with them? The first two books that I wanted to talk about are books that were actually read to me by my dad when I was a kid. So the first one is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm sure most of you have read this or have seen the movies or Lord of the Rings. My dad first read this to me out of an illustrated edition when I was, I'd say probably somewhere between 6 and 8 maybe. But I loved it. I'm not sure if I loved the experience of sitting and reading with my dad more than the book, or if I really just did love the story, but it definitely really got me interested in adventure and fantasy from a very young age. And then one of the other books that my dad read to me, he read lots of books to me, but one of the other fantasy books that I remember particularly him reading to me was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. And this just follows, if you haven't read it, follows a young girl whose father is missing on another planet, and she has to go try and save him along with one of her younger brothers and a friend that she meets. I loved this as a kid. I reread it recently in this November, I think, last year for a book club. It was still enjoyable as an adult, but it's definitely very young and written for young kids for sure. It was interesting, we were talking about it in a book club because it's a lot of girls who had already read this and we were rereading it as adults, and we all thought it was interesting how strong of a character we thought Meg, the main girl, is in the book when we were younger, but she doesn't seem quite as strong from an adult perspective. But I don't think that's necessarily a flaw. Like, she's a child, she's, I don't know, maybe 10 years old, so you can't expect her to be, you know, absolutely fearless and anything like that. So she whines a little bit, she's scared, but she does what she has to do, and she, I think, is still actually a very strong character. So I would highly recommend both this one, Wrinkle in Time, and The Hobbit for young readers, either to read on their own or to have read to them, if you're looking to get them into reading or into reading fantasy in particular. And The Hobbit is very accessible as an adult reader, I think. Tolkien wrote this for his kids. Even though it's obviously meant for much younger readers than Lord of the Rings, it's still quite enjoyable as an adult, and I've read this several times as an adult reader. So my dad read it to me when I was maybe 7 years old. I read it for the first time on my own when I was about 12, I think, after seeing the first Lord of the Rings movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, and then I read the 3 Lord of the Rings books, and then I picked this up on my own, and it was still enjoyable then, and then I read it again a few years ago as an adult in my mid-20s, and it was still quite enjoyable. So I would recommend both these as an adult or for young readers. And then the next books I wanted to talk about are series. So I have 3 different series I want to talk about. Well, I'll just quickly mention a super obvious one. Obviously Harry Potter was a very important series to me as a kid. Got me into fantasy. I wouldn't say got me into fantasy, I had loved fantasy for a long time. But this was maybe a different kind of fantasy than I was used to. I was used to more adventure fantasy. Obviously Harry Potter has a little bit of adventure elements to it, but not so much the kind of quest style adventure fantasy. But I'm sure you all know what Harry Potter is, and if you haven't read it already, I don't know what you're doing with your life. But I go back to this every few years, so it's still accessible as an adult, and it would be great to read to kids for sure. The next series I want to mention, I read probably when I was between the ages of 10 and 12, and that is the Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamora Pierce. So the first book is The First Adventure, the second one is In the Hand of the Goddess, the third one is The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, and the last one is The Lioness Rampant. So I think what made me pick up these books off the shelf when I was a kid was that it follows a young girl who's a redhead, and on the cover she's got this purple glow around her, so it's very obviously to do with magic, and she has a sword, so I assumed she was going to be fighting as well. And then when I read the back, it mentions how it follows this girl who wants to be a knight, but only boys are allowed to be knights, so she has to pretend to be a boy to go to go through training to become a knight. I was very much a tomboy growing up, and this kind of really appealed to me, this girl doing something that was kind of out of the realm for girls, and something that she wasn't supposed to be doing, but that she really wanted to do. And yeah, I really appreciated that as a young girl. And again, it was kind of magical adventure fantasy, and I would highly recommend this for young girl readers in particular. I know boys who have read it and enjoyed it, but I would say it's I don't know if I'd say it's essential fantasy reading for young girls, but if you know girls who like fantasy and haven't read this series yet, I'd highly recommend it. I know Tamora Pierce has a couple of spin-off series that I've tried to read, but I don't think her writing is necessarily suited to adult readers. I have reread this quartet as an adult, and it's enjoyable. I would say, not that it's poorly written, but I'd say it's more enjoyable for nostalgia reasons as an adult, going back to it. But I think if you're coming to it for the first time as an adult, it would still be enjoyable, but it's obviously a very easy read. And there is a little bit of romance elements to it, but nothing outrageous, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily problematic romance, like the kind of stuff that you get in contemporary YA, so like it's not like Twilight or anything like that. And all these series that I'm showing are, I would say, are considered YA, or at the very least like 12 and up, if not young adult. The next series I want to talk about, again, I'm sure a lot of you have read and know about, and that is his Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. So the first one is The Golden Compass, or I think it's also been published as Northern Lights in the UK for sure. I'm not sure if that's been published that way elsewhere in Europe. The second book is The Subtle Knife, and the last book is The Amber Spyglass. So these three I really enjoyed reading when I was a kid. They were quite dark. They follow a young girl who goes again on an adventure. It has a lot to do with religion, which when I was a kid, that was one of my complaints about this series, that it was very heavy-handed in the religious undertones. But I think I haven't reread this as an adult, and I'd really like to, and I don't think that would bother me as much anymore. I think especially coming to it with a degree in religious studies, I'm a little bit more familiar with the stories and the mythology of religion and Christianity, so I think coming to it as an adult, I'd be able to appreciate those religious undertones a little bit more than I did when I was a kid. But again, I'd really recommend this series for young readers, probably I'd say in 10 to 13-year-old range reading, looking to get into fantasy or who already enjoy fantasy. And then the last series I want to show you, you might notice a running theme that most of these follow young women. So this last series is the Abhorsen trilogy by Garth Nix. So the first one is Sabriel, the second one Lyriel, last one is Abhorsen. This one's quite dark. It follows girl Sabriel, who becomes a necromancer after her father's passing, and she wants to try and save him, but she realizes that she can't because of the kind of negative consequences that will come of that. And yeah, so it's just about her adventure. Again, there's a little bit of a romance, but really not a lot. And again, it follows a very strong female character. So I think all of these series would be enjoyed by young boys who enjoy fantasy, but I think they are probably particularly important for young girls to read, just because I feel like maybe it's different now, but when I was a kid, fantasy just felt like very much for boys, and science fiction felt very much for boys. So it was really nice as a girl growing up getting to read this series that really focused on strong female protagonists. So I would really recommend them to any adult reader who is looking for some really well-written children's fantasy. But if you know young readers who either are looking to get into fantasy or who are looking for some new series to read, I'd highly recommend these. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that video. Let me know if you've read any of the series or if you have any thoughts or recommendations. I don't read a lot of YA anymore. I do still like to read children's literature though, so if you have any recommendations for children's fantasy series that you think I might be interested based on these recommendations that I've spoken about, let me know down in the comments below, because I'm always looking to pick up some new children's lit. So yeah, anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!